Hello, my name is Bernard Taylor and I'm an experienced and successful physics teacher. As many schools and colleges across the world have closed, you might want to stay in touch with your studies to stay ahead of the game and to prepare for your return to school or college. In today's session, I want to talk more generally about Newton's life and work, and in my next session to focus on gravitation. There won't be so many equations in this session, you might be pleased to hear. Isaac Newton was born at Woolsthorpe Manor, near Grantham in Lincolnshire in 1643. This building is now a National Trust property and is well worth a visit. I went there a few years ago, and as a physics teacher, I got a real buzz out of visiting the place. The old farmhouse building is next to a small apple orchard, and we all know the supposed story about Newton and an apple. These days, you can even purchase online apple saplings that are DNA certificated to be from the same stock as those in the old orchard. How cool is that? Your very own Newton apple tree. The building contains a fascinating collection of artifacts, prints, items of furniture which go back to Newton's time. There are even graffiti which may, or possibly may not, have been inscribed by Newton himself in various parts of the inside of the building. As a youngster, Newton was known for making models out of wood and was very creative in this regard. He is said to have somehow attached a candle to a kite or created an early fire lantern, which he flew at night and terrified credulous villagers. Sadly, Newton's father died a few months before he was born. When he was 3 years old, his mother deliberately left him with his grandparents while she went to live with her new husband, the Reverend Smith. Some years later, as a student at Cambridge, Newton compiled a list of his sins. One of them reads, "Threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them." The apparent loss of his mother's affections must have affected his personality and clearly led to anger management issues. However, he did later move in with his mother after her husband died. We are under lockdown because of the COVID-19 crisis. In 1665 and 1667, Newton escaped the plague which was affecting Cambridge and returned to perhaps the relative safety of Woolsthorpe Manor. Some sources suggest that the plague killed as much as 15% of the population of London at this time. Newton's period of lockdown, quite possibly less strict than ours, led him to an intense period of work on optics, on calculus, or the method of fluxions, as he called it, and the famous laws of motion, 1, 2, and 3, as well as gravity. And here is an engraving of Trinity College, Cambridge, with Newton's rooms in the foreground. On one occasion, according to his biographer, William Stukeley, they talked after dinner under some apple trees about gravity and about apples falling towards the center of the earth. There was no mention of apples falling on anyone's head. This was a myth, a later addition to the story, to the mythology about Newton. Newton certainly knew about the motion of the sun and the moon. He also knew that projectiles fired from a cannon rise, fall, and hit the surface of the earth. What Newton did, amazingly, was to unify gravity on earth with gravity in the heavens. It was indeed the same gravity. But he did more than this in using mathematics to build on the work of Kepler and Galileo. Here we have Kepler's laws, but I want to focus on Kepler's third law, which states that t squared is directly proportional to r cubed. Or, if we put it as an equation, t squared equals k times r cubed. T is the period of orbit of a planet around the sun. R is the average radius of orbit of a planet around the sun. And k, in the case of an equation, would be a constant. Kepler himself could not explain this relationship which he discovered. The equation followed from the data of Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, and Kepler. The numbers fitted the equation. But why? Kepler did not know. It was a purely empirical relationship. Galileo supposedly dropped objects of different mass, large and small cannonballs, from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The objects have the same acceleration and hit the ground at the same time, as long as they're released at the same time. The gravitational attraction at the surface of the Earth is constant. Like the Song of Canaries, it never varies. Acceleration results in a certain speed after a certain period of time has elapsed. Incidentally, Galileo almost certainly carried out experiments on releasing balls along inclined planes or ramps and calculated their acceleration rather than dropping anything from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Newton is well known today for his work in mathematics and physics, or natural philosophy as it was called. He's less well known for carrying out experiments in alchemy and for his theological research. He was attracted to the Arian heresy and had to keep quiet about his religious beliefs during Puritan times. Newton said that there were 7 colors in the spectrum, but can you identify indigo? Have you seen this color in the rainbow? The suspicion is that Newton wanted there to be 7 colors because the number 7 had great significance in his mystical view of the world. Getting back to gravity, Newton wrote that gravity might extend to the orb of the moon. Newton realized that the moon was under the influence of 2 types of motion. One was the force of gravity pulling it down towards the surface of the Earth. The other type of motion was along a tangent to its orbit. Newton used a knowledge of what we now call centripetal force, related to circular motion, powered by calculus. He united gravity in space to gravity on the surface of the Earth, with a set of equations which we'll explore very soon in my next session. All of this is contained in the Principia, published in 1687, written in Latin and not easy to understand even in translation, because some of the vocabulary describing physics concepts is not familiar to us today. You should explore more about Newton's life and about his times yourself. One thing that you will find is that he had a rather nasty side to his personality. He argued vehemently with Robert Hooke, famous for Hooke's law, on a number of issues. Hooke accused Newton of plagiarism, of not recognizing his contribution to the development of calculus, and Newton was furious. He removed any mention of Hooke from the book, and later, when he became president of the Royal Society, he had portraits of Hooke deliberately destroyed. Newton also argued vehemently with Gottfried Leibniz over who had first discovered calculus. As it happens, both discovered the methods of calculus independently of each other. And here is a portrait of the older Newton. I would like to end with 2 famous quotations. Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Were these people like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, perhaps? He also wrote, "I don't know what I may seem like to the world, but as for myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then in finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." And so, thank you very much. That's my introduction to Isaac Newton.